Hello and welcome to the Social Media Sucks podcast. I'm Jason Donnelly with my trusted co-host Chris Kubernis.
That's me.
I'm so incredibly excited about today's guest. The laundry list of accomplishments that this guy has is incredible. It's giving me goosebumps right now. He's an author. He's an AI researcher. He's a professor. He's a video game software developer. He sold an AI firm to Uber. He worked at OpenAI. He is now the CEO and co-founder of Maven social media network. I am elated. I'm so excited to welcome to the show Dr. Kenneth Stanley.
Thank you.
Hey,
great to be here. Thanks for having me here.
This is the Social Media Sucks podcast.
Oh, look, I got another follower.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good for you.
I can hear you saying that, but you don't seem happy for
But
me.
no, of course I'm excited for you.
Keeping you up to date on what's going on in social media. Brought to you by Cupco.
Social Media Sucks.
We are so excited. We have so many questions. And like I said to you before, as a fellow author, I'm so excited for anybody who's written books. I want the quick synopsis of why greatness cannot be planned. But if I understand correctly, it talks a lot about how setting objectives are bad for you, especially if you're interested in innovation and creativity. Is that very short synopsis?
Yeah, that captures it really well. The book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, is really a general book about setting objectives and the problems that can come with it. But it came originally from AI research. So it's sort of a social critique. You can read it that way. But I am not a social critic or a philosopher or something like that. I was hardcore AI research. And it's just that I was doing experiments in machine learning that showed that in certain cases, especially when it comes to innovation or discovery, having objectives can actually lead you astray and prevent you from doing things like discovering new ideas or making innovations. And it just over time became clear that this isn't just an algorithmic insight, it's actually an insight about the way the world works in general, or just about reality. Really, if to make it a little more concrete, like, because it sounds really abstract, the reason that objectives can be bad is because of what's called deception, which is that if there's something that you really want to do, let's say something like get unlimited clean energy, something like that. That's like an ambitious objective. It's very possible that the things that lead to it don't actually look like improvements in energy utilization. It could be some biologist researching like tree sap or something like that. And so if you're too focused only on, did we increase efficiency 3% or something like that, you're going to miss these opportunities to do other things that seem completely unrelated, but end up turning out to be the essential things. And that's because of deception, because it looks like you're going in the right direction, but actually it's the wrong direction or not the ideal direction. And so the whole book is about this principle and how it applies to like everything in life, including your personal life, including institutions. Because if you notice, all of our institutions run through objectives, which is education, scientific, corporate, like philanthropic, and of course, social media. That's where it sort of ties in. And it sent me directly to this idea of creating or over years, it sent me to this idea of creating a social network. So at first it seems really weird that I would go from AI researcher to social network. But the book is the sort of the missing piece in the puzzle that transitioned me from one to the other.
That's really interesting. It reminds me a little bit of the story of actually how Viagra was created, right? Because, and I guess a lot of innovations, right? Because researchers or they're doing experiments in this direction, and then they go, wait a second, this was not the intended outcome or what we were going for, but this is the actual innovation. This is where we ended up. So it's quite interesting to sort of, would you say like you still need an outcome, but then be open to deviations? Or is it still like, don't have an outcome, just be in a direction and then let your mind open up and be like, what can I find out as I do this? What do you think is the best approach? Is it like, okay, have a general sense, we want to go that direction, but we have to be able to deviate from that? Is that sort of how you would see it? Or
I would say the central point is that it's important to respect the possibility that you might have a sense of what's interesting, even though you don't know where you're going. And people are actually really good at that. It's like, this is interesting to me, and I actually don't know what the outcome is. I don't have a deliverable. This is a big problem, of course, for like the way that most bureaucracy works, because they want to know what the outcome is. They want to know the deliverable. And not only they want to know that, they want to have a metric so they can measure whether you're moving in the right direction towards the deliverable. But if you don't know where you're going, how can you have a metric? But the point is that sometimes actually we're really good at that. That's actually, I think, one of human beings' greatest skills is our ability to identify something interesting before knowing where it might be going, which is why you get all these bizarre stories, like things like the invention of the microwave oven, or I mean, that's like, the person who invented that microwave oven was working on radar technology. And you look at those things, often they're under the category of serendipity. Like in Wikipedia, you can find a serendipity page with dozens of these kinds of stories. But what's important is that it's not just average people having these kinds of serendipitous discoveries. Because if serendipity is just random, then it would just be random people who have serendipitous discoveries. But it's always very highly skilled, very talented people with a really good track record, because it's not random. It's the ability, which is actually a skill, to know what's interesting, but within your domain of expertise. So of course, like you wouldn't ask a person on the street, like, what's the most interesting new opportunity in AI? You would ask an AI researcher for that, because that's what they've spent like decades thinking about. Or you wouldn't ask some random AI researcher, like, what's a really good innovative thing we can do now with cooking? Because that would be somebody that would be better be a chef. So it's not random, but it's something that is a skill that all humans have, like within where their experience is. And so what I'm really saying, or what the book is saying, is basically to embrace the fact that we have this skill, which we're really afraid of talking about or embracing because it's subjective. And we're very afraid of subjectivity. See, because objectives gives you metrics. And that's why you can call yourself objective. I'm very objective about what I'm doing. But if you don't know where you're going, you don't have a metric. So all you can do is argue subjectively about why this is an interesting thing to look at. It doesn't mean there's no content to the argument. Like there's a lot I could say about why I find certain things interesting. And that's what we should be talking about. But instead, we tend to culturally avoid those kinds of discussions because we think that it's somehow off the table if it's not entirely objective. It's some kind of obsession with risk mitigation. And you can notice this also in social media too, just to make a quick preview, that it's very objective because it's all based on measuring whether something is popular. Popularity is an objective metric, which is supposedly bringing us to the promised land of quality. And so it actually reflects this cultural obsession with objectives. It's just another reflection of this thing that happens in every single domain.
No, I was going to say serendipity is going to come up later when we talk more about Maven. So I'm glad that it came up now. But
well, I mean, maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but is that like with your AI research? Through that, did you discover this sort of social media thing? Is that like you're looking at what was interesting and said, oh, this is, while I'm studying AI research, this human aspect of how do social networks work and why are they run this way? Is that what came up, and that's why you're in this direction now?
No, it was actually a really long evolution to get to a point where I thought anything about social networks. So I really was not very interested in social networks. I mean, other than what most people might use them a little bit. But I didn't used to think much about pros or cons of social networks. I was thinking about AI mostly. But what happened was because of the book that I somehow got veered into social networks. The thing was, when I wrote this book, if you think about it, it's a very unusual move for like an AI researcher, because an AI researcher usually interacts with AI researcher audiences like almost 100%. They don't interact with the general public or like, doctors or artists or teachers, or they basically interact with other researchers. But because I wrote this book, I started to be contacted by this huge array of different walks of life, because people who read the book were just connecting it to whatever kind of life that they were living, which was not necessarily anything to do with AI. And it sort of became, the book and myself, weirdly, became a focal point for people who were, I would say, disgruntled with the very objective, non-serendipitous culture that we live in from all kinds of perspectives. Because it's like, if you're in a professional situation and you want to do something because it's interesting, and your manager says, no, we don't know where this is going to lead, so we're not going to fund something like that. Or you're a scientist like I have been, and you're trying to get funding for a project, and you have to give what the deliverables are. It's like, what is the outcome that's expected, so that the panel that's deciding whether to fund you can decide whether to fund you. So you can't just say it's interesting. They need to know what you're going to get. And so people in all contexts were sort of like really disgruntled. I mean, even personal life works this way. I mean, think about like, if you're looking for, like trying to get a date, they want to know what you're looking for. And you're supposed to know what the objective is. What if you don't know what you're looking for? Like, how do you engage with those kinds of services? And so it's very difficult to be serendipitously oriented in our culture. And I was basically catching like all of the discussion of this, which is a really obscure discussion. Like, nobody talks about this, which is why we wrote the book. And so over years, this took many years, like it was like 7 years since the book came out, when it started hitting me that It was kind of this saturating feeling that like I was becoming more frustrated myself by talking to all these people because all I was doing was talking. And I was feeling a lot of the time people would say things like, you know, I like almost everybody was in agreement with what I was saying, at least the people I would encounter. But they would say, like, I really love these ideas and I really would like to change things, but it's really hard because I answer to somebody and they are very objective. And this goes all the way to the top. It's like CEOs, people running billion-dollar labs, like they answer to somebody. It's like the board of directors, Congress, maybe. It's always somebody you're answering to. And how could you explain this like really obscure esoteric argument that I'm making here to somebody like that and like actually change the way that you allocate $1 billion? Like it's very hard to convince people of this. And this was a frustrating thing I was running into. And I started to feel like maybe I could do something. And it just hit me suddenly that, wait a second, like this book, it doesn't originate from social critique. It's not like I'm a philosopher. It's not like, because it sounds like some new age philosophy, like follow your interest, like do whatever you think is cool. Like that's not actually where it emerges. It emerges from actual concrete algorithms, which I called open-ended algorithms. Like there's a whole sub area of machine learning on open-endedness. And this is the kind of research that I've been interested in my whole research career, which is about creating systems that are oriented towards serendipity. And so I thought to myself, you know what, like it should be possible to go backwards and take this sort of social critique and move it back to concrete systems. I was thinking like, could I wrap these open-ended algorithms around people like somehow so that people are embedded in a system that works more the way that we're advocating? And it then hit me that, you know what, that's actually like a kind of social network. Like if there was information moving back and forth among people in some kind of network, but it's got like nothing to do with modern social networking. Because I mean, my trajectory of thinking, as you could see, has nothing to do with any of it. Like I wasn't thinking about like maximizing engagement or quality and likes and things like this. It's just a completely different thing from open-ended machine learning type of research. But now I end up on this. And then I thought, well, that's really interesting because I hadn't really, in my book, I had almost said nothing about social networking. And now that I think about it in hindsight, that's a big omission because this objective obsession in our culture, what I call the objective paradox, this belief that having an objective can actually lead to success when it can actually do the opposite, that it actually does apply really strongly to social networking. Because if you think about it, the obsession that we have with likes and with follows, which is like this ubiquitous thing. I mean, it might have other names someplace, sometimes we call it upvotes or something like that. But it's 100% the objective paradox. I mean, it's an idea that like just because you're maximizing on this metric, which is popularity, this leads to something that somehow is the ideal version of quality in the world. And clearly it hasn't. I mean, we know there's huge amounts of unintended consequences from like the toxicity and the echo chambers and the narcissism amplification and the personal branding. It's like you could go on. And it's like every single day there's a story in the media. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because the title of this podcast is like completely consistent with the point. I mean, social media sucks. And that's not what's supposed to happen if like you're on a quality metric, like a metric that objectively leads to quality is not supposed to lead to sucking. And so it's an exact case study of what the book is talking about, but one that I just had missed that is actually really an important socially relevant issue. And so when all those things hit me, this is like middle of 2022, when I was at OpenAI actually, but not working on social networks. It got into my head that like, maybe this is not crazy. Like at first it sounded crazy. Like, I'm like, what, I'm going to take open-ended algorithms, like drop out of AI research and like somehow get people inside of them and just like go into a completely different type of profession. But it just like was so intriguing to me. And I've been talking to people, you got to remember, for years about like the lack of serendipity in the world, that I just couldn't resist. I mean, I talked to tons of people, including investors and colleagues and potential co-founders. So it wasn't like I just jumped in completely raw, but it was just hard to ignore that this might be possible. And so I thought like, it's the right place, the right time, the right idea. Maybe I should just like try this out. So that's what led me to doing this.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. The one thing that you brought up that kind of changes my whole thought process about it is I feel like when I hear of AI research, I feel like it's a numbers game to begin with. And when I hear about this book and the way that you're thinking, it's almost the artistry. Like you have a blank page and an artist looks at that page and you don't know where it's going to go, what your medium is, if it's going to be pencils or colors or paints or whatever that thing is, but the end result is the magic. So I think it's super cool that it's just that juxtaposition of purely numbers, qualitative, whatever the thing is, and then the beauty of what you actually want. So super cool. But that brings me over to, you've been doing AI research for 40, 50 years?
Since he was 3?
It's been since the 80s, am I right? You've been going into the AI research. I've never had a chance to interact with anybody with this much experience in AI. How scared should we be?
Yeah. Well, just to clarify, I mean, I'm not even 50 years old, but it's true that, I mean, I'm not sure when we would start saying I was doing research, but it could be, yeah. So, I mean, I've been interested in AI since maybe 12 or something. So it might not be an exaggeration to say more than 30 years. So yeah, like, are we in trouble? I would say, I'm myself not totally sure. I feel like you don't hear that enough. Like, everybody's got a very strong opinion one way or another. I mean, as somebody who's been in it, so I do know something about it. I still think it's unclear, like, what level of concern we should have given where we are today. But pretty much, I think, given that it's unclear, we should have some level of concern, because there's a possibility that there are some dangerous unintended consequences here. I mean, some are clearly already here. I mean, but like the civilization ending kind, I'm unsure about that. But things that affect like employment and professional things, those are concerning right now. We should think about those things. We should think about the longer term existential things too, but I'm not less sure about that, because it depends how the technology develops, and everything about that is just speculation. Like, that's the problem with it. We don't know for sure where things are going. Yeah. This relates directly to the point about the objective paradox, by the way. Like, if you look at AI, it's clearly moving up objectively. Like, AI this year is much more impressive than it was 5 years ago in many objective ways. Like, you could look at any benchmark and see that it's just blowing away the technology from 5 years ago. Does that mean it will continue to move in that direction? If you've gone up to the top of a mountain, does it mean you're going to get to the moon, which is a common analogy? So we don't know if are we in a deceptive objective situation where it looks like we're going in the right direction, but it's actually a dead end? Or is this really the true path? And there's absolutely no way to know. You can speculate about it. Experts will have interesting things to say about that. But at the very moment, I mean, nobody knows for sure. And so I think we have to keep an open mind. But I'm one that would err on the side of caution. So I wouldn't mess with the future of humanity without being very careful about it. But I also wouldn't be pronouncing doomsday right away either.
Can you explain a little bit the difference between like open-ended algorithmic AI and other forms? Like, what is the big difference here?
That's a good question. So the vast majority of AI or machine learning is driven by an idea called optimization, which usually means that you're trying to get to a point, which I would call an objective, with your algorithm. So the point or objective is some kind of behavior or skill. So let's say it's to get a robot to learn how to walk. That's just an example. Sometimes we try to get robots to learn how to walk. So the objective is to walk. It starts without being able to walk. And then we try to optimize some kind of complicated controller to get to a point where it might be a neural network, where it get to a point where it actually controls the thing and it can walk and balance and everything like that. And so when it's done, sometimes we say it's converged, like it converges to a point, and that's related to what we might call convergent thinking. So we go all towards a point as we're thinking together. And the objective is accomplished if things go well and we celebrate and we feel like this is good. But if, on the other hand, Well, actually, I should mention it can also go badly, which means that you get stuck or something. Like some people would call that a local optimum.
Doesn't happen.
Then it didn't work out, and then it's just not good. That's just typical machine learning or AI. Like that's the way it is. Even with like super ambitious things like a large language model. Like in the end, the hope is that you'll become very good at predicting the next token. And you converge to that over, you might have looked at trillions of tokens of text, but in the end, you converge to being good at predicting the next token. And there's nothing more to do. I mean, you basically have converged. But open-ended systems are very different from that. Open-ended systems don't converge, they diverge. And so the point of an open-ended system is that it doesn't ever finish. And so if it probably most useful for understanding open-endedness to talk about some examples, because at first a lot of people intuitively have trouble, like what does that even mean to be diverging? I mean, we've heard about divergent thinkers. Like divergent thinkers often is associated with creativity or even like genius or something like that. But what does a divergent system really mean? Well, there are some examples of divergent systems. Like one of the most well-known would be natural evolution. It's something where you start out with presumably a single-celled organism, and then we get this branching tree of life, which gives us all of living nature, including humans, but also including things like photosynthesis and flight. It's basically an inventor that's invented everything in nature, all in, from a machine learning perspective, a single run. And the longer that run goes, the more interesting it gets, the less converged it gets, the more diversity there is, and the more complexity there is. And presumably, if you left it running even longer, it'd get even more interesting. It's not like it converged to humans and now it's done and it's all over. We're just one point in the saga. And the interesting thing about it is that we're not the objective. You could even argue, which is actually a very important algorithmic point, that if we were the objective, then there would be no humans. Like the reason it discovered us is because it's divergent and it's not deceived by a single objective. It's willing to go through stages that have nothing to do with intelligence to get to intelligence because it doesn't care about getting intelligence, which is why we have intelligence. So for example, like one ancestor that we have, like if you go back and look at your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, go back like millions of times, you'll get to flatworms. So somewhere in your ancestry is a flatworm, which was a very important event, actually, because it was the introduction.
My grandma was a flatworm, so I mean, it checks out.
Maybe in some families, it's closer in some families than others. But actually, flatworms were really important because of bilateral symmetry. Like they were the first introduction of bilateral symmetry. But no one would look at a flatworm and say, Shakespeare is right around the corner. Einstein is right around the corner. I mean, it's a worm and it's got it's symmetric, but what does that have to do with any of this other stuff? And yet it's essential. It turns out to be a stepping stone that must be crossed.
It's a funny way of looking at it. It's an interesting way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah, so you can't be thinking in an open-ended system about the end because you'll never get anything. No. So I just want to point out that there's one other important open-ended system, which is civilization. It's very similar, actually. You start with things like fire and wheels, and now you've got things like space stations and computers. And it's because it doesn't have an objective. It's not convergent. It's not an optimization process. It's divergent. The more things that are invented, the more things will be invented because every invention is a jumping off point for many other inventions. So it's always getting more interesting and more complex the longer it runs. And so from an AI perspective, that's a very exotic and different type of process than a convergent optimization process. It has completely different algorithmic properties. But in my view, as somebody who's been advocating open-endedness for decades, as you say, it's essential for us to be able to build algorithms that can do this because those are the most prolifically creative and the most important to understanding where we are and what we are that exists. You can't have, in my view, intelligence of the human level without having true open-endedness. And that's why, I was leading the open-endedness team at OpenAI, and there is now a sub area of people who specialize in open-endedness.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that brings me up, especially with OpenAI. I heard you say at one point that a chat you had with Sam Altman, he was saying that, or you guys figured out, he's all about scaling and you're all about divergence. Like your thing is divergence, right. A serendipity network. It's bringing information. It's fostering creativity. It's everything that you're just talking about. So it's incredible to hear it straight from you. But the next part, as someone who's co-founded a social media network, definitely want to dive into social media as a whole before we talk about Maven. Mm-hmm. Very excited to get there. But you said this thing before we got into this, we talked a little bit. And you said this thing that I need you to explain to viewers and myself. I'm gonna read this. I'd like to examine how much the ubiquitous domination of popularity contest incentives contributes to many of the problems we see today. My question was, what? And can you talk a little bit about what you were thinking when you sent that over?
Yeah. So what I became sensitive to when I had this kind of epiphany that my thinking about open-ended systems, serendipity, and the objective paradox, when I realized that this relates to social media, is I started to understand, or at least think about, the fact that the interpretation of what is the objective in social media is clearly powerfully on the issue of popularity. Like, popularity is the overriding objective. And it's embodied in the incentive system. The incentive system is to get attention, and attention is popularity. And the incentive system is likes and follows, basically, are ways of basically objectifying popularities. Like, how can we measure it objectively so that every tiny little scintilla of content has been properly ranked in this gigantic popularity contest? And so, if this really was true, that popularity is analogous to quality, then this would work. So, because ultimately, I don't think people would generally think popularity is all that matters in life. It's just that I think that the theory is, or the hypothesis is, that popularity is a proxy for quality. Because actually, I'm sure most people just want things that are high quality. They don't just want to be around always popular people and popular stuff. And people want to be around quality. But, I think that, like, early on, I wouldn't ascribe any kind of sneaky ill intent to, like, early founders who were on the scent or trail of popularity. I think they genuinely thought it was actually a clever way to get a system to self-organize around quality. Because, if you think, like, early on, like Mark Zuckerberg or something, it's like, well, how are we going to show people the stuff that's good? Because there's obviously going to be a lot of crap around. Like, that's obvious if you just let, millions of people or billions of people just come into some system. And then it's like, oh, there's this amazing possibility here. Have people rate themselves. Like, it's just the people solve the problem and do the consumption all at once. And, like, we don't need to figure anything out. And so it actually seems like a really clever way to deal with the problem of, like, what is quality. But of course, like all, like, ambitious objectives, as our book would argue, there's a lot of unintended consequences, or what I call deception. And so you get immediately, what you get is a lot of convergence. But actually, let me put it in a more kind of like conversational context, rather than, like, get all scientific, because I just wanted to say it this way first, maybe because it make it sink in easier, like, instead of being all obtuse about it. Like, just imagine, like, what in life really is a popularity contest? Like, where do we have a genuine, real world popularity contest? And I would say it's the junior high school cafeteria. The junior high school cafeteria is like hardcore popularity contest. It sorts by popularity. People sit by popularity, and people sometimes get downgraded or upgraded based on popularity. And it is not a good experience. It is not good for you mentally. It's not good for you psychologically. You would not want your whole life to be in the junior high school cafeteria. And yet, the entire system that we've devised for ourselves is even more hardcore than the junior high cafeteria. I mean, it's not just like the people are getting ranked. It's like every single sentence is in a giant popularity contest every single day for eternity. And so we are living inside of that. And, so it's funny when people talk about the town hall. I'm like, this is not a town hall. This is a town junior high school cafeteria that we have created for ourselves. And of course, it's going to work that way, and you're going to get the same nasty unintended consequences. So this is a metaphor for it. But I could get into because it's not just metaphorical. It makes sense also at a technical algorithmic level, because the thing about it is that, like, of course, and this is getting algorithmic, what you do get when you get objective metrics is convergence. Like, objectives are about convergence. Optimization is about convergence. Things move towards clusters when you put things in an objective context. Because, like, the thing that starts to get richer, because of rich get richer phenomena, attracts more and more and more attention. And that, by necessity, there is a sort of a zero-sum aspect to this, because there's a finite amount of attention for the day. And so that attention, which is directed to the thing that's getting richer, is not directed to the things that were neglected because of that. And so we get convergence on a few pointy things every single day for the rest of eternity. And those are the popular things. And the problem with that is that Indeed, I think things that are of popular appeal probably do appeal to you. That's the whole meaning of popular. They probably appeal to any given person. But what you don't get are the things that could be transformative to you that are not popular. Those are completely left out of this system. And you have to understand that everybody is idiosyncratic. And in fact, almost always, if something transformative happens in your life, and this is what we call serendipity, like an unplanned transformative event, almost always it's something obscure that other people wouldn't agree with. Because if it was something everybody would agree with, then you would have already experienced it because it would be ubiquitous by now because of the popularity contest. It's always something idiosyncratic because the thing is people are idiosyncratic. Like it could be that you find out that you just have a huge lifelong obsession with butterflies because of some obscure event that happened with butterflies back when you were 13 years old. If that event hadn't happened, you wouldn't have gone off in that direction. But we can't just get 1,000 people in a room and ask them to vote on what you should think about. They're not going to vote on butterflies. They won't be able to figure this out. This is idiosyncratic to you. All that idiosyncrasy and individuality is sucked out of a convergent system based on optimization, which is popularity based. And so instead, what we're going to get are side effects, which we don't expect, which are the nasty stuff, which aren't based on quality. Because the thing is, quality is subjective, and we have to grapple with that. Like the fact that like something means a lot to you and changes your life, it's subjective. Like that's like subjectivity has to do with individual experience. So we can't be completely objective about it. And if we're entirely religiously objective about things, well, then you are going to get things like personal branding. Of course, you're going to respond to the absolutely powerful incentive system. You're going to get convergence. You're going to get echo chambers, of course, because people are going to converge around agreement, points of agreement. That's what you get with popularity is people have to like toe the line of the popular clique. And narcissism amplification and all of the nasty stuff. And I mean, I feel myself responding very sensitively to these incentives now that I've become like more analytic about it, because I didn't used to think about any of this at all. Like I said, it's not even in the book. But after I started thinking about it, I started being more sensitive personally, like to what's going on, because I have an account on X, for example. And I notice I do things because I understand the incentive system. Like I'll put a post up because I know it's on brand for me. And then it's not because I actually think I'm starting a good discussion, like a substantive discussion. It's more that I know the people who like me are going to like me even more because this is like on brand. And the people who don't like me are going to argue and thereby bring more attention to the people who do like me and actually bring more people who like me into the discussion. And I'm just going to get more popular. And yeah, some people are going to think I'm an idiot and hate me. But what does it matter? Because like it has nothing to do with winning or losing. It just has to do with getting more popular. And it doesn't have to do winning or losing isn't the important thing. What it ultimately doesn't have to do with is learning something. I'm not actually trying to learn anything about myself. I'm not actually trying to become deeper or more engaged or understand the world better. I'm just trying to amplify my brand. And so I know that about myself. That's the incentive I respond to. So of course, in the popularity contest that we all live inside of, we're all going to respond that way. It's just human nature. It's not because we're bad people. And what's interesting, I think really interesting, is just the implicit understanding or assumption that there's no better way. Like people, when I said I was taking these out, like we took out likes and follows out of Maven, people actually said to me, you're taking social out of social. You're taking the social mechanisms out. Like, how can you have a social network without social mechanisms? And that's just, to me, is like a crazy indictment of how far we've gone. Like the idea that like social is intrinsically popularity. Like there's nothing about being social that has anything to do with anything other than just popularity metrics. It's an amazing point that we've come to, I think, as a society, that we don't even question that there's anything else that we could possibly be doing.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
I want to listen to that over and over again.
Yeah, that's
everything you just said.
It's a mic drop for sure. I mean, like the trouble is how much of society or how much of social behavior is governed by popularity or is governed by that social dynamic of, you would almost say, status or hierarchy as well, because it is like the more popular kids, like you mentioned, the high school cafeteria, the junior high cafeteria, the most popular kids also usually were the most good looking kids, right? So there's also an aspect of status that way as well, right? You were good looking, you had, you were on the sports team, you were doing this specific thing, and that's what made you popular, and that's what also got you more attention. And it's like, are all social systems sort of built that way? And if so, then that just translates to social media. And I also completely agree with you on your points, because the worst parts of society seem to be amplified or exacerbated by social media. And it's one of the reasons why, I mean, the podcast is called Social Media Sucks. I own a social media agency, so I mean, I'm part of the problem, obviously. And I've also done the things that you've done. I've become an influencer. I've, won the popularity contest in some ways. And when I won it or I got to that objective, I was like, am I learning? And is this actually contributing to a better life for myself or my kids or for whoever? And ultimately I came to the conclusion that no, it's not really. And that's also why I pulled back quite a bit in the last few years. Because I was seeing like, I can't really take this anywhere else. I'm basically, like you said, just producing stuff to adhere to some sort of version of myself that I've built online, some sort of personal brand, right? So, and I can't color outside those lines because the algorithms won't attribute to that or won't actually like give me anything from that, because they'll just keep saying, oh, well, that's not going to perform well. That's not going to perform well because it's not what we've seen from you. It's not what your audience has been interested in. They're not going to like this content. So therefore, the feedback loop of, okay, then I just don't produce that divergent content. I just don't do that anymore. I just produce the same sort of shit. And I was like, that's not moving the needle for me anymore. So I just kind of gave up. And I think a lot of people find this, right? I think that's why you see a lot of YouTubers quit. They call it burnout. And I would just say that that's just a function of they've won the popularity contest. They're not learning. It's not giving them anything anymore. So they're that's why they burn out. It's not because of the workload. It's because the feedback loop isn't doing it for them anymore. So it's, I completely
Chris,
agree with you.
You just said something that threw something divergent again. Instead of burnout, it's more like it's bored out. You just keep doing the same thing and getting the same feedback. And I think this is a perfect transition into Maven. Everything that I've read, it feels like that bored out, the term that I just made up here, is not a thing that could happen with Maven, because it's so divergent that it keeps spreading and finding new things that you might be interested in, bringing them in and serendipitously bringing them to you to say, you might like this, you might want to check this out. And then you keep diving in so you find more things that you like and keep going down the rabbit hole instead of just liking something and moving on to something someone else liked 100 times or individually, whatever the case is. So let's dive into Maven.
Sure.
I mean, I guess that's
what's the question,
it's
Jason?
not really a question.
You're like,
yeah.
dive
I
into
guess that's
Maven.
not a question as much as can you describe what Maven is? Is that how it works? And does that make sense that bored out wouldn't happen because it continues like that?
Yeah. Those are really good points. The bored out, and I just want to point out that, like, there's perhaps two different maybe experiences on social media, because you got the winners to some extent, and to some extent the losers, because you guys are speaking a bit from the winner perspective. It's like you won the popularity contest, and so now there's a number of unexpected feelings that might come with that, including getting bored out. Because there's something a bit superficial maybe about the experience, because it's not an experience of sort of enlightenment or illumination. It's more just winning a competition, and so it's not really the pursuit of knowledge in earnest or something like that. But you also have to remember the losers too. And I don't mean losers pejoratively. I just mean people who don't have tons of followers. And there's some people who don't want to play that game. So that's why they're the so-called loser. It's not because they can't do it well. They just don't feel like doing it. But I think it's important to recognize that.
I'd also recommend don't playing that game. Sorry to cut you off, because I don't think it's a winning game at all. And I don't think it even matters to the algorithms, because you can amass millions of followers in Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whoever isn't going to show your content to them anyway. So it's a dead end.
It's not as gratifying as maybe it might seem. But you have to remember too that the reason I wanted to mention the people who aren't necessarily the winners of this game is that they're the vast majority as well. Because like I was reading a stat, you guys may know this better, but some stat I read online said that I think it was 99.9% of people on X have under 10,000 followers. And I think that's kind of interesting, even if that's like in the ballpark. Because it really means that it's just really only about like 0.1% who have like sort of guaranteed engagement whenever they want it. You fall below some threshold and it's just like, it's a hit or miss. And at some point, it's just like you'll never get, like, if you have like 5 followers, like, forget it. And I just want to suggest that, like, within that 99.9% of the population, there actually are people with interesting things to say. It's like a really crazy thing to think that, like, everybody in that lower percentage is like just completely dull and with nothing to say. And so basically this relates to like our sort of obsession with meritocracy, and I like meritocracy. I'm not anti-meritocracy. I just want to point that out. But the thing is that, like, the idea that everything has to be carefully designed to be fully meritocratic, or else it's like invalid. It just doesn't work at mass scale, because, like, I mean, I think a lot of people who do feel invested in the popularity contest ultimately justify it as meritocracy, because I remember telling one person about Maven, and they were saying, like, but what about the people who worked so hard, to get like did he mention somebody that we know? He's like, he has several 100,000 followers. Like, how do you think he's going to feel? As if I'm like betraying this poor guy with his hundreds of thousands of followers by not having, it's like he's going to feel really hurt or something.
Probably doing fine.
And it's like, yeah, I'm sure he's doing fine. It's not going to threaten him. But yeah, it's like, are you suggesting that only like the 0.1% of people like him like have anything interesting worth sharing? You don't want to be exposed to anyone else, like only them? Because you understand that, like, if you're generally if 99% of your exposure is to ideas from 0.1% of the population, like, you're missing out a huge amount of possibilities, which again could be idiosyncratically important and transformative to you, because the things that are transformative to you would not be of mass appeal, even if that wonderful person is of mass appeal. Like, he's captured that mass market, but the things that would be transformative to you are not. And it might be that there's some farmer in Thailand that could say something that could change your life, and he doesn't have 500,000 followers. And so when are you ever going to get that experience? You're not going to get it on any service out there. And also, how is that farmer in Thailand going to get a chance to actually get some engagement? Why shouldn't they? Like, what do you have to play this popularity game to have the right to say something that might be interesting to somebody, especially if you're not in the pursuit of popularity? Like, maybe I just want to talk about something. I'm not trying to get a brand or create a following. It's just something that's interesting to me. And this applies to those winners too, because I know that, like, I am very inhibited from talking off brand on something like X, because I'm going to turn off my followers. Like, if I have some criticism about my washing machine or something, it's like, you imagine sending that out to 10,000 AI researchers. They're going to be like, what the heck is this coming out of this account? It's like, I have no reason to send out these or even things that are more, hacked? Yeah, right. Was I hacked? Even things that are maybe more interesting, like philosophical issues. Like, I have some philosophical interests, but they're not my expertise. I'm just interested in them, but I'm not going to talk about them because I know I might sound stupid, and I don't want to sound stupid. So, because I'm in a popularity contest. Like, in a popularity contest, you can't afford to sound stupid. And so I think it's hard even for the winners to go off the brand and explore how they might want to otherwise if they were in a different world. And so, yeah, Maven is designed to allow all those cases to flourish that aren't covered by the popularity contest, that have to do with just talking authentically because you're interested in it and getting engagement for it. So probably most impactful for the 99.9%. Just because of the fact that you can get engagement if you're not even if you're not popular. Because on Maven, no one's popular. There's no concept of popularity. There is a system, so it's not random. It's not just like we just like send you the fire hose of everything and just hope for the best. But it's based on interests instead, following interests. So this is actually, it might sound subtle, but it's like a really radical thing. Like, you're used to following people. You follow channels, you follow people. That's what social media is about. Maven is radically different in that you only follow interests. And so you follow interests instead of influencers. But, think about what that does to all these incentives. It completely flips them all on their head. Because if I follow AI, I'm not following the people who are most popular in AI. I'm following the subject of AI. And so I'm going to be intersected with people who are of all of that spectrum, from the people who have hundreds of thousands to people who have no followers and their ideas. And what the system is trying to do is to figure out, based on what it knows about my interests, which things to put in front of me that should go into my feed, just based on my interests, so not based on following. And it doesn't have likes either, so it's not a popularity contest on likes. It's different, though, than something like, say, Reddit, where you might think on something like Reddit, you can also follow an interest, like you can go to the AI subreddit or something. But it's different because, like, here, what it's doing is you don't post to something. There's not silos. You just post, and then it figures out what interest it intersects with. And it could be multiple. You could be talking about AI and ethics. And so people interested in ethics might be interested. People interested in philosophy might be interested. People interested in AI might also be interested. And it will cross-pollinate all those communities into a single intersection around what you had to say. And you don't have to be somebody special. And so you get this chance to have all of these different walks of life, talking about something together.
No, I guess my question is, I love everything that you're saying, and I'm so interested, but I guess the question is, how does the system differentiate garbage, something that may have the words that I'm interested in, but not make any sense or not true or not whatever? And how does it decipher that and then give me things that, again, that I'll like without liking them?
Yeah. Very important question. Because that's often the first question. It's natural. Like, it's like, well, isn't it all going to just be garbage? And, this is why I think humans are just very afraid of looking at garbage. Like, it's like a deep-seated fear, because like most of the things we do, this is why the world is running on objective. It's because we have this huge fear that like something that I shouldn't think about, shouldn't do, like might actually happen, and it'll just ruin everything. So it's like I need to always know that everything has been protected so that I won't be exposed to something garbage. I won't risk doing something that's not necessarily going to make me millions of dollars. Okay, and I actually concede that like it is important that you're not just absolutely overrun with garbage. That's absolutely true. But maybe just relax a little bit, because there's other things in life that matter too. Because divergence matters, diversity matters. And in fact, the field of open-endedness, which is the field of machine learning that we talked about, where I've been involved throughout my career, is all about this balance. If you think about like open-ended systems, they're about the balance between quality and diversity. There's actually a whole field that grew out of this called quality diversity algorithms. And so Maven is informed by that, is that this whole field of algorithms, which are about balancing quality and diversity, grew up not around social networks, but around search algorithms that were searching autonomously through spaces that might be interesting. You can think about like searching for different walking gates or something like that. So you want quality and diversity in that space. Like you want kind of interesting hopping creatures because it's just interesting, even though it's not the most efficient gate, because the most efficient gate would be some kind of incredible running gate, but you still want to know about those interesting gates, and you just want a huge collection or repertoire of the interesting and the high quality all together in one big package. And these algorithms, and what's really important about that, by the way, is this is something to think about. The things that lead to extreme high quality often are not themselves high quality. This is a really counterintuitive thing. This is the reason for the objective paradox. You sometimes have to cross a stepping stone that looks bad to get to a stepping stone that looks good. I mean, history is absolutely saturated with examples of this.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and the stepping stone could take up 5 years of your life. I mean, you could be out there completely obscure in a corner drawing crazy pictures that nobody cares about, but it leads you to doing something that people do care about down the line because you perfect that obscure, crazy obsession that you had. And so we need to be open sometimes to stepping stones that don't look high quality with respect to objective metrics to get to the ones that are high quality, whether they're individual or at mass appeal. And so these algorithms, these open-ended algorithms, are about that. They're about that balance. And one thing we've learned in this field is that one way I think about it is that quality is a hammer, but diversity is a feather. In other words, if you are worried about both, if you put emphasis on quality, it'll absolutely kill diversity. Diversity is the weak thing. Divergence is the weak thing. Quality is powerful. Like if you put in quality mechanisms, they powerfully push you towards convergence and destroy diversity. And so you have to be very careful to treat quality delicately so that it doesn't stamp out diversity and divergence. This is like a principle that's well understood in open-ended algorithms, but outside, because that's an obscure field, like nobody even thinks about this. Everybody is wielding this hammer with absolute glee without any understanding of what the implications are for the other side of things that matter in life, which is diversity and divergence. And that is what's happening in social media, is that we have the quality hammer writ large, like just destroying everything with its absolute power, because that's the thing that like everybody's worried about, is we're going to be subjected to a stream of garbage. So make quality the king, and then we can like absolutely rule the world. And this is what's happened to us. This is what is the result, is what we have now is the eternal junior high cafeteria. But the thing is that it's actually in the field of open-ended algorithms, because we spent all this time thinking about this, we have come up with alternatives to this hammer. And those are more delicate. And one of them is called the minimal criterion. And it's, so again, this is obscure. So like no one knows about this outside this field. But the minimal criterion is basically this idea of using, instead of a ranking basically implies maximization. So basically, like what I mean by ranking is, if I get 10 likes, great, I'm better than anybody so far in this, maybe in this area, until somebody gets 11 likes. Then they're better than me. And then somebody gets 12 likes, and then 100, and then 1,000, and then 1,000,000. And so we have maximization, like we're trying to maximize. And there's an assumption there that once you get to the nirvana of like 1 billion likes, like it's absolutely the best thing in the world. And we've all agreed on this. And everything else is basically like way below and way less important and relevant and important to us. And that's what maximization does. It draws you towards convergence because you're always competing to go to the top. But there is this alternative. The minimal criterion is a threshold. So it's like the opposite of maximization. A threshold says, below this line, we do think things are not good. Like this is actually bad stuff. Like it's like garbage, you could call it. It's not interesting. But above this line, we don't have maximization. We're absolutely agnostic because we understand that what's transformative to you is not what's transformative to someone else. So it doesn't make any sense to think about this objectively or quantitatively all the time. Like we're in a subjective world. Like human content is massively multidimensional. It's like incredibly subjective. There's no way you could possibly have it on a single objective dimension because of the fact each of one of us is unique in terms of our interests and idiosyncrasies. And so it doesn't make sense to have this maximization competition all the way up to 1 billion. But it does make sense to filter out some level below a threshold. And this has been used inside of open-ended algorithms, in my opinion, to really incredible effect. Like I love these minimal criterion algorithms, which again are obscure. Even people in AI may not always know about these, but I've always found it really interesting because it's so simple. It's like maximization is more complex because you get into optimization. You have to like constantly be moving up a gradient, but a threshold's really simple. You're either below it or above it. There's nothing else to think about. Like the algorithms are extremely compact, like almost like a few lines, and yet they do things that are really interesting. What they do that's interesting is they diverge. Like almost all machine learning algorithms converge over time. Like they move up to a point and then they end. But things with minimal criterion diverge because they're basically saying that everybody above the line is equal. Like we don't have like try to make distinctions above the line. And so all of those things are pursued simultaneously in parallel with equal amount of enthusiasm. And so it just diverges and diverges and diverges. And you get all kinds of stuff above threshold. And so you aren't going to be seeing a stream of garbage. So we instituted the minimal criterion in Maven, like inspired by this research, which is why I thought I could move into social networking. It's just, to me, it's like really interesting that like there's this whole field that's been thinking about this stuff, for decades actually, which is absolutely directly relevant to how we think about searches through large content spaces, but is had absolutely zero influence on the thinking of any of these like amazing kingpins in this giant, powerful social force of social media. It's just incredible to me. And so like we're going to import those ideas and take the minimal criterion, use this thresholding idea, and then everything else, we're agnostic when you're above the line, but things below the line, they're going to get throttled. So it's not like you'll never see something bad because you have to let people sometimes see something bad or else we won't find out it's bad. But we'll see it less and then we'll throttle it after a while. And we don't use likes at all. Because you don't have to, basically. I mean, likes creates competitive competition. It creates this incentive system. So we get rid of likes, which is a very strange experience at first, by the way, because we assume, where's the like button? We can just look at engagement. Like we can look at, like, do people actually engage with this thread? And if there's too little engagement, it doesn't cross that minimal criterion line, and that thread will disappear quickly from the system.
Very cool.
I guess one of the questions we got from the team, actually from Mark, everything that you're saying is almost like it's an anti-social social network to get as much out there to do good for the world, to give people things that they can learn and expand on and have those like amazing aha moments. I love everything about that. It's an education system. It teaches you because you kind of go on those divergent paths and kind of learn stuff. But Mark's question is the one that I'm worried about, that I don't know what's going to happen here. How is Maven going to create revenue if the platform has none of these metrics? Or is it truly an altruistic case, like to save social, to focus on just helping and changing the world for the positive? Like, I would love to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that's a big question. And in some sense, aligned with that question is the fact that this is basically a big social experiment. Like, can something like this actually be self-sustaining? I feel like it's really cynical to believe it can't. Like, that would be sad if like the only thing that can be successful is the most cynical thing of all, which is like this nasty like popularity contest for eternity. So I'm just hoping at an emotional level that like it's possible to be successful by not doing that. But practically speaking, what does that actually mean? Like, how could this actually work? Well, I think that there are clues to how this could work in our early days right now. Like we announced our existence in January, so it's been like basically only 3 months. So we've learned a bit in 3 months, like about like what are the prospects for a system like this. And one thing that we've seen is it's definitely true that there is a population, or you could call it a market, that does want this. Like we have them on there. There's a passionate core little community right now, which is really into being on Maven. And so the question is, how big is that? How big is that? Like in totality, like we're seeing a small subset of whatever market it is right now, because we barely even gotten the word out that we even exist. But we know that it does exist. And so why would it exist, and could it be big enough, why it exists is some of it is intuitive. Like actually some people are sick of the popularity contest. Some people are sick of it without realizing it. But as soon as you say something like, follow your interests and not influencers, which is a tagline we've used sometimes to try to compress this into like a soundbite, like people immediately realize that there's something they haven't been thinking about. Like they're not really sure what exactly that means. Like, what is that going to be like? It's kind of hard to project. But they're like, well, that's actually, why do I only follow influencers? Like, what else could I possibly be doing? What would it be actually like to be in a different world? And that does attract a lot of people, because I mean, this is a moment in history where people are becoming really aware of all the downsides. You go through your feed, and to me, it's like I go through my feed on X, and I'm very kind of transfixed for a while. I stick with it, but then there's some moment like 30 minutes later where I just feel like I just ate an entire chocolate cake and I'm nauseous. And it's like, because I just realized this actually wasn't good for me, even though it's like so addictive.
Bad content diet.
Yeah, it's like it's just like it's doom, or it's just like promotional, or it's like I'm not learning things, I'm not expanding anything. I'm just getting upset without actually like hearing real arguments, like whatever it is. You realize it's just not actually making your life better. And so a lot of people are starting to realize it. I feel like that has something to do with the title of this podcast. And so actually, I think we have a strong differentiating appeal, that like we speak directly to that disenfranchisement with who we are. And so there's a chance that this could be a business, because there actually is a market that wants that. It's like really interesting because it's so historically contingent. Like if this was 25 years ago, it would probably be harder to make this case, because there wouldn't be this context of the popularity contest. And you'd be like, well, how exciting is following your interests? It's like, it sounds like an intuitive thing to do, but it's like not an amazing innovation. Yeah. It's like, I follow my interests all the time. Like, okay. Mm-hmm. But now it's like very contrarian because of the way that the world ended up going. And so like it differentiates very strongly. And so I think, like, to get even more concrete from a business perspective, that's the first question. The second question is literally, how do you make money? Even if like a lot of people want this, and if they actually like it after wanting it, which is another big question, hopefully they actually enjoy the experience. They don't just like the idea of the experience. But we've seen enough that there's some population. What I don't know is it 1 million people, 10 million people, 1 billion people? I don't know that yet. I hope it's 1 billion, but I don't know, who actually enjoy being in a world that's not popularity driven. But whatever it is, generally I've gotten the idea, like talking to investors and things like that like if you have enough people, there'll be some way to monetize it. It's really, the really big question is, do enough people want this? Like people will be willing to do something if they really feel like this is a solution to some problem that they have, like the problem that we have, which is presumably that social media is anxiety provoking, toxic, and so forth. Like if this to some extent solves that problem for some people, then they'd be willing to give something, whether that's attention to an ad or $1, like because they would like to subscribe. That's a big open question, which I've been hesitant to endorse something yet, because we don't have either right now. It's totally free. Yeah. because what worries me is that people are going to assume that I've made an official statement. I get a little worried because, like, I noticed that on the site itself, there's a lot of curiosity, which is natural, about this question, and everybody's speculating, like, how are they going to make money? How are they going to make money? Which is a totally reasonable thing to be asking. But then I realized that, like, if I give any hint at all, it's going to piss off half the people, because, like, there's strong opinions in those discussions. Like, people are like, I would hate it, like, if they suddenly, like, start using advertising and you're going to get corrupt and it's going to go back to all these things that they've repudiated. But then it's like, well, what we have to do something, But, like, I don't want to say what it is before I even know what it is, because I don't want to go piss off all these people unnecessarily. So my mind, just to be official about this, is open. Like, I'm willing to look at, like, what your arguments are, like, as the people who are using the system, and learn from you what is tolerable here, like what could be corrupting. Because people think ads are corrupting because they're part of the popularity contest. But I'm not sure, because, like, if there is no popularity contest and we just show you ads because they're aligned with your interests, I'm not as sure whether that's, like, necessarily going down that nasty, slimy road as much, but I'm willing to hear the arguments about it. Or maybe it's a subscription service to keep away those perverse incentives, but I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure, like, is that necessary? I'm not sure people would be willing to pay. Will they be willing to pay? If they are, maybe that's better because it keeps this purity. I've heard some people argue that, unlike some social networks, there would be more of a willingness to pay because people spend more time going deep here. Like, people get into deep discussions that go far. Like, on X, your discussion, like, short circuits immediately as soon as somebody engages because they're just hit and run and then they're gone or something like that. But here, people have no reason to do that, so they just go deep. And so maybe they would pay $1, like, to actually be able to have these kinds of meaningful conversations. But we don't yet know. So we have to carefully, I think, very carefully look at that to not undermine the, as you call it, like, altruistic motivation, but somehow still survive. I mean, I have to concede we have to survive.
It's so weird because on one side, I see it as a former adjunct professor back in the day. I love the education side of this. I love the sharing, the serendipity, the finding these magical moments, just like in any brainstorm. I love seeing that, and I'm already a part of it. I've joined Maven, and I'm super interested. And then as a marketer, with my hat on this way, my marketer side, I go, I wonder how much I could sell of X, Y, and Z to someone who's truly interested in X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? Like, it's no longer just saying a bunch of people like this and it's popular. It's saying this guy likes this thing over here, and he would probably love that product. And it's like, I'd never want to see the platform go just that way. So, like, it's I have this crazy mix between the two.
You have to concede that's interesting. I mean, that is an interesting thing. Like, that, like, people are explicitly telling us what they find interesting here. So we don't need to go, like, mine your personal data and, like, invade your privacy and figure out what you might like by seeing what you've been buying online. You literally have told us these are your interests, which is like a unique thing. But then it is intriguing, I think, that then we could literally show you stuff that you told us you're interested in. And I'm not sure that's like a corrupt thing to do. Like, I'm just not, I mean, like, if I'm interested in the philosophy of consciousness, and I start seeing books about the philosophy of consciousness, like, is that, like, have I violated, the sanctity of our ideology? Like, I'm not really sure about that. It seems like it might be even cool. So I would be open to considering it.
Yeah.
I have one final question for you before we let you go. This has been extremely interesting. My mind is blown. I don't know if I can process all of this stuff that you've told us, but I think you're onto something. I think there's something interesting philosophically, societally, if that's a word, socially. There's just a lot that you're working with that I think is quite interesting. And I think a lot of people are interested in it, like you said. I definitely see that. I mean, as a social media agency owner, also as a father, I'm very concerned about the future of my children and where they spend their time, specifically on different social networks. So I think a lot of people listening, I hope those of you listening have gotten something out of this and also are taking it in and thinking about your own social media usage, and is it helping you, and is it, giving you enough serendipity to find new things and to explore your interests. But the last question that I have for you, and it's maybe a bit of a popularity contest in itself, is if you could kill any platform today, just completely wipe it from the face of the earth, never to be returned, which platform would it be? I know it's one of your competitors, so it's. I know I'm asking for this, but give us the honest answer. Which one would you just wipe from the face of the earth? See ya. Never want to see you return. And we'll end on that question, because I think that's going to be a good one, coming from another social media platform founder.
Interesting question. Yeah, I'm. One thing that I want to sort of make clear is that I actually don't think Maven is a replacement for the popularity contest type of media, because I would want to concede that it does play some useful roles. Like when you want to make an announcement. I mean, this is great for making announcements. Maven is not a good place to make an announcement. And I've seen people come into Maven and not realize this, because they're used to the usual paradigm. So they come in and post some announcement, and it's like, you're just promoting something. Like there's no discussion to be had here. And you're not going to get an accumulation of likes or adulation about this. So it just goes away, and it's probably a disappointing experience. And so, but there is a place for that. I'm appreciative that I can reach an audience of people who are interested in my work on X. It's useful to me to be able to do that. There are unintended consequences that are negative, but there are also positives. That's like a lot of things in life, and Maven's going to be that way too. Like there will be things that you don't like and things that you do like, but I think it plays a role. It fills a niche that's right now missing, which is this opportunity for serendipity on the internet. But we still need our announcement services. And so I don't think I don't think that, for example, X is highly threatened by our existence or something. Like if I was Elon Musk, I wouldn't be quaking in my boots that, oh my God, Maven's going to take over. It's just doing something different. And so I just wanted to put that up front before I condemn something, because it's not like I think that this is actually a competition where one of us is going to wipe out the other. And I do think though that, now that said, that these unintended consequences can be pretty nasty, and concerning, especially, talking about children or young people, but I also have kids, so it does concern me too. And I generally have been, I kind of think sometimes personally about things that I know I'm going to get addicted to. I know I'm not immune to just getting super swept up in things. And so I've tried to avoid things that I know, because I know that visual things, for example, are way more addictive than just text, for me at least. I think it's probably true in general. Mm-hmm. And video even more. A video is just unbelievably addictive. And so I think that's more dangerous in some ways, for personal growth, because you're inside a popularity contest, is very visually driven and highly addictive, and it can make you feel things about yourself that hurt. I just remember, growing up being a kid, and it seemed pretty rough, the popularity contest of the 90s, for example. That seemed pretty rough, but it's incomparable to the current popularity I can't even imagine it being global. Can you? I can't even begin to understand what it means to have a globalized version of junior high. Yeah. It's it was bad enough just there, but now you've got people who are just so popular that a million people around the world just think they're cool. And I don't know what that does to me. 100 million. Yeah. It's what does that do to me? It's just a normal developing teenager, to be living in that world, or actually subject to those incentives. Even if I'm successful, I'm not implying you have to be a loser, to have some bad times here, because it's you're now comparing yourself to people who are even more popular, no matter who you are. So you're never going to be satisfied. It's you can't just be can you be actually the coolest kid in the school anymore? Is that possible? Because you just go online and there's somebody cooler than you. And so, I mean, I think it's way worse now, is my guess.
So is your answer Instagram? I thought that's where we were going. I'm like, all right, so
but I'm really like hesitant to even say anything like this. Like I don't like condemning entire services, so I'm not saying this with any
we won't hold it against you.
to shut down Instagram because I see that like people really like it and want it, but yeah, that stuff is concerning, and I don't know what it's doing to people, but it's got to be hurtful.
And I know Chris said that's the last. I have a quick follow-up because it's about that. What if Maven could bring video image to the serendipity of Maven? Like, wouldn't that be a double down of everything that you want?
Maybe, yeah, like that. Yeah, that is interesting. It's worth another question for that one.
You're addicted to getting the serendipitous things that you might be interested in that you don't know. Instead of
I see what,
this dog butt has 40 million likes.
Let's address that one because that's a good question. You know, because it's true that even like I saw one comment on Maven where somebody said, I'm finding this experience of seeing a lot of diverse content that isn't popularity driven very addictive. And so I'm like, okay, that's a real like almost a paradox for us, and it's like a riddle. You know, it's like, well, are we just creating another kind of addiction, or like what does that mean? Should I now be repudiating my own self? But I don't think so because, you know, something I've thought, like I've had this thought before that like I feel like human beings are just like addiction machines. I feel like I could be wrong. I'm maybe being cynical, but I think like everyone's addicted to something.
You're right.
It may be
Absolutely.
a secret that you don't let people know, but you're addicted to something. I've been addicted to many things. I can't help constantly being addicted to things. If I'm lucky, it's not the bad things. You know, it's not like heroin, but I'm addicted to something. And I've personally sometimes tried to cause myself to get addicted to things that are like relatively good for me, like work, for example. Like I've gotten addicted to work, and I'm not claiming it's all good. Like being addicted to work has some real downsides, but it's like if you're going to be addicted to something, it's better than getting addicted to heroin to be addicted to work, because at least it leads to some upsides. You know, you have some degree of success, then it can lead to helping you to support your family. And so like, we're all going to get addicted to something,
worse things.
You know, like it's just like, choose something to get addicted to that's going to help you also, you know, because you're going to be addicted to something. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody who's not addicted to something. So we're a healthy kind of addiction
the next
if we're an
tagline
addiction
for
at
Maven.
all. Yeah.
The next tagline for
we're
Maven.
all going to be
Get addicted to something healthy.
That's a good one. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. So that's my answer to that.
Ken, thank you. Thank you so much. Like Chris already said, you said so many things in this episode that just blew my mind. I can't wait to rewatch, re-listen, and take note because it was great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you,
so
Ken.
much.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. It's been an episode. Holy moly! I hope everyone enjoyed it because we certainly did. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in, and watch on YouTube. Like, subscribe. Help us get more popular. Even though this is not a popularity contest.
If you want to go to Maven, you can go to heymaven.com.
Yes.
You'll find links there to get into the service itself.
Oh, we're going to link them to all of it, and don't you worry.
Where can they follow you, Ken? What's the best place on heymaven.com or?
Well, heymaven.com. I mean, Maven, the app, you'll find me on there. It's also available through the web through there. You can use the app or the web, but I mean, you can also find me on X if you want to. If you want to follow me, which it sounds silly to be advocating after all of this talk about how bad following is, but you can follow me on X and get my announcements there. But I hope to see you on Maven.
Yeah, we'll link you below.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.